introduction for the second time in one school year. This is so great. I hope this becomes our annual tradition.
Thank you, Britt.
This is wonderful. So Mary Beth Klee has such an amazing background. As you all know, she's our founder. She was also our head of school for the first 6 years Crossroads existed. She brought Crossroads from St. Denis to where we are here. And none of us would be here today without her. I mean, it's no exaggeration to say that all our paths have crossed, sorry for the pun, all our paths have crossed because of Mary Beth and because of all the incredible work she's done to establish Crossroads and to, I think even more, set an incredible standard for education, what a school can and should be. So I feel really humbled to be following in her footsteps now that we are here at Crossroads and honored to be introducing her tonight. Mary Beth does have an incredible background in addition to all the things that she's done at Crossroads. She's also a graduate from the University of Notre Dame. She received her master's in education from Boston University, and then she went on to get her PhD, I'm going to make sure I get this right, in history of American civilization from Brandeis. Very impressive.
It's an ecumenical background. Catholic, Episcopalian, and Jewish.
So another crossroads that we have here, all those different traditions. She also is a co-editor of the Human Odyssey, which is a world history book for middle school students, and the American Odyssey, a world history book for high school students. She co-edited both those publications. She also is an author of the Core Virtues literature-based program on character education. It's something that is near to dear to all of our teachers' hearts and to my heart, something that we base our curriculum on, along with Edie Hirsch's work. And then I heard tonight that she finished her other book, which is a story for another time. And maybe when that book comes out, we'll have a chance to have a book signing here and celebrate that publication as well. So without further ado, a warm welcome from Mary Beth.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really am enjoying being back, and it's a great delight to be with all of you, so many familiar faces. I really appreciate the invitation. So I'm going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then we're so lucky. We have Peter Tenney with us and Bruce Freeberg, who can help me answer questions afterwards about the Crossroads history program. They've been in the trenches doing it for the last 20 years, Peter, and 15? 10, Bruce? It only feels like 15.
10 years.
Okay, great. So my talk, looking backwards and looking forwards. January, the month named after the Roman god Janus, is a time for taking stock. As we begin a new calendar year, but in the depths of winter, it is typically our month of New Year's resolutions, the time when we resolve to go to the River Valley Club. And we look back and we say, why didn't that work out last year? And we look ahead and say, how am I going to make it different this year? And that ability that we have as human beings to look back and look forward and be reflective about where we've been and where we're going is a uniquely human ability. You know, scientists who study the animal kingdom often look for the differences between Homo sapiens and, let's say, chimpanzees or gorillas, other animals in the animal kingdom. And it used to be thought that the ability to use tools was differentiating, but it turns out that our furry friends also have that ability, that chimps can use sticks to catch bugs, and not only that, they fashion them with intentionality. But they have cognitive abilities of many sorts. But we human beings, alone among mammals, have not just reflex memory or episodic memory, but the ability to reflect on our past and make sense of it and make it a story. We have the capacity to look back and look forward, and with goodwill and emotional commitment and through reason, we can chart a course into the future. And you see that we do this almost instinctively. We have cities, for example, named Washington, Cincinnati, Athens, and Syracuse. We name our space probes Magellan and Columbia and Cassini. Okay? We do this not just because we think it sounds educated, but we want one moment in time to to link with another moment in time, so that in naming our cities, Washington, Cincinnati, and Athens, and Syracuse, we're identifying with a trajectory of freedom, okay? And in naming our spacecraft after Magellan and Columbus, we're identifying with the trajectory of ourselves as explorers. And that's what the Roman god Janus, who presides over this month, is about. He is often called the god of thresholds, and we see him with a face in each direction. The old bearded Janus looking back. What did I do? How did it work out? The young, possibility-filled Janus looking forward. Okay, now how do I get where I want to go? What course shall I plot for the future? And it's that spirit that guides us tonight in the spirit of New Year's resolution. This unique human ability to learn the story of the past is one of the most important gifts and tools that we as parents and educators can give to primary grade children, that can help primary grade children develop. You know, reading, mathematics, science, they're all very important, and I would certainly make the case for reading and mathematics as the two key critical skills in primary, central skills of primary education. But history is the great grounding discipline. It provides context, it establishes trajectory, it illuminates possibilities, and sometimes it flashes a big, bright red warning light. And when we look back in a sequenced way over the course of world and American history, we gain some perspective on where we are in this human journey and where we might be going in the next decade or century, and which of these might be good paths and which of them are paths we should definitely shun, okay? So some of you might be thinking, well, that sounds very lofty, Mary Beth, but I remember my study of history, and it was boring, boring, boring. Okay, and in what way is any of this important or relevant for kindergarten to 8th graders whose ERB scores or SATs or other standardized tests never evaluate history in any way, shape, or form? And when I think, maybe perhaps you're saying, when I think about the world that our children are racing into, a high-speed digital world of computers, internet, and social media, explosion of information, why waste time on ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt and ancient Greece and, God forbid, the Middle Ages when hardly anything ever happened, right, Peter? Okay. So I'm going to...
Distant mirror.
I'm going to unpack and I hope explode some of those myths for you tonight. That history is boring, that history is not going to help anyone on a standardized test, and that history is irrelevant to the modern world. And maybe some of you parents are new to Crossroads and drawn by the school's academic rigor, strong language arts, math, and science, but there's still part of you that's saying, you know, what's with this history program? Why is there so much of it? Because when you consider what we've got here in the core knowledge sequence, it is, to which Crossroads is committed, it is very substantial. First of all, it's double-stranded, okay? So we have a world history strand and an American history strand going through kindergarten through 6th grade. And then the two merge, they come together in 7th and 8th grade to have a single history strand that basically deals from World War I to the present in a unified whole, okay? But it is sequenced, it is specific, and it is very substantive. To give you an idea of the richness, in this slide I'm showcasing, for example, the highlights of grade 2, with world history on the left and American history on the right. And this is just 2nd grade.
I'm a second grader.
Oh, hooray! You're saying, oh, I see, I know that. Yeah. Okay. And I'm just using this as an example. If you look at an overview form at the core knowledge history curriculum, you'll find that in K to 3, we introduce the ancient civilizations of, let's start with the Ice Age, but we introduce Mesopotamia and Egypt in 1st grade, and then they do an overview of the major monotheistic world religions, so Judaism, Christianity, Islam. And then in 2nd grade, they're on to India, China, and Greece. 3rd grade is Rome, okay? By 4th grade in world history, the students begin their study of the Middle Ages. And And that includes units on medieval Islamic civilization and in 5th grade medieval Japan. 5th grade also brings a study of the Renaissance and the Age of Exploration and England's Golden Age. 6th grade in world history embarks on a review of key ideas from ancient civilizations, because they're kind of they're 4 years in the past for the child at this point. And it begins a study of European Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution. And 6th grade takes us through to the age of democratic revolutions, beginning with the United States. Now, in U.S. history, during this time, students will have worked through the main lines of American civilization twice, okay? They will start in 1st grade with the Ice Age and Native American settlement, that's Mesoamerican settlement in Maya, Aztec, Inca. They look at Spanish-American colonization and then North American colonization. They do colonial U.S. in the 1st grade, and they end with the Revolution in the 1st grade. I think we actually get as far as Jefferson and Louisiana Purchase in 1st grade. 2nd grade picks up, as you can see here, with the Constitution. It's the children's first systematic introduction to the Constitution. They'll come back to that again in 5th grade. And they will proceed through to the national history, and in this case, national history basically over the next few years through the Civil War to the early 20th century. Now, when in 7th and 8th grade the strands merge, oops, I did it wrong. Okay, this is, for example, it's an example of the 7th grade program. In 7th and 8th grade, the two strands merge. I'm showing the 7th grade highlights here. 7th grade takes us from World War I to the end of World War II. We're looking at the end there of Eleanor Roosevelt, looking at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which she headed that committee that the UN drafted and helped to draft it. But basically, it takes us through at 8th grade. Peter, you don't get to terrorism, do you? Do you stop at the end of the Cold War?
A little bit.
Or do you do September 11th?
We did, yeah, yes, actually.
Okay.
I actually show a film on September 11th,
Okay.
but we don't study in depth, but we do Arab-Israeli conflict in the 8th grade. So that's kind of can segue to the world of terrorism, frustrations in the Arab, in the Islamic
So
world.
we basically come into the contemporary world by the end of 8th grade. So wow, that's pretty exhaustive and demanding. How did we get that, and why do we do it? So let's start with the first question. How did we get to this? I build this talk as looking back and looking forward, a history of and history at Crossroads. So let's do the history of part. I want to take you back to the late 1980s and early 90s when Crossroads had its genesis, because the discipline of history had a great deal to do with the founding of this school. And during those years, the late 1980s and early 90s, I was finishing a PhD in the history of American civilization at Brandeis, and I was doing some teaching on the college level. And I began to note with other instructors at the university level some truly appalling knowledge gaps among the students seated in our classrooms. For example, these are my classrooms. There was a student who remarked, "Wasn't it curious that we called it World War II when there had never been a World War I?" The student in a lecture that I gave on the Protestant Reformation who asked why I kept leaving out Martin Luther King's last name. I've never heard of Martin Luther. Students who didn't know which came first, the American Revolution or the French Revolution. Students who didn't know which side Ho Chi Minh fought on, and some students who didn't know which war he was in. Students who speculated that the Middle Ages started around the year 1, midway between BC and AD. And these factual knowledge gaps, evident in the college classroom, seem to reveal much more. They were a tip of the iceberg experience. What was underneath? Or was that the problem? Was there really not very much underneath? And if so, why? Because these were bright undergraduates coming from good schools. In 1987, 2 books of major importance came out, and for me they were illuminating. They explained what we seem to be seeing in our college classrooms. The most intellectually significant of the 2 was E.D. Hirsch Jr.'s Cultural Literacy, What Every American Should Know. And in that book, which was heavily footnoted and highly academic and certainly did not look like bestseller material, Hirsch set forth an argument that would challenge and attempt to shape the change the shape of American education. Now, E.D. Hirsch Jr. was a professor of English literature at the University of Virginia. He is and was a Wadsworth scholar. But in the 1980s, he began to do some research to figure out why his undergraduates at the University of Virginia could not write well. Why was it that his students had such difficulty producing such strong essays and research papers? Why did the University of Virginia, not to mention many of the Ivies, have remedial writing centers on campus at this point? And why did students seem to be so poor at interpreting texts which decades ago would not have seemed terribly challenging? And after several years of research, he concluded American students were reading poorly and writing poorly, not because they lacked the ability to decode words or to pen grammatically correct sentences, but because they lacked exposure to subject matter and ideas that were worth thinking and writing about, okay? He argued students were reading and understanding less and writing poorly because they had not mastered the knowledge base that made serious reading and thoughtful interpretation and good writing possible. Now, Hirsch looked at what had been going on in the field of education since the 1960s, and he pointed to the fact that during that time, educational theorists had increasingly focused on the importance of learning skills over content. The underlying notion was, it's not what a child learns that's important, it's that the child learns how to learn. You would hear this over and over again. Knowledge had come to be seen as less important than the ability to acquire knowledge. And therefore, in American schools, and increasingly, the content studied at each grade level was regarded as largely optional. It could be left up to the decision of individual teachers, faculty members, administrators, or school boards. And when I say content or knowledge, in contrast to skills, let me clarify what I mean. When we're talking about content, that's the what of education. So in language arts, what stories should they have read? What poetry? What speeches? In history, which major figures should they have studied? Which major civilizations? In science, what topics? In what order? Okay? In the fine arts, which composers? Which musicians? Which painters? And in 1987, the important thing in terms of curricular objectives was to specify not the knowledge, but the formal learning skills that one should acquire at each grade level. And that is the how of education, okay? So what were the school's goals in problem solving, critical thinking, research skills, decision-making skills, cooperative learning, independent learning, inferencing skills, higher order inferencing skills? And these were spelled out in a great deal of detail, while the content was largely absent. And again, the specific content teachers chose was seen as often seen as their choice. Now, this teacher choice approach to content in education had roots in an older romantic philosophy of education begun by John Dewey in the early 1900s. And that made the issue of content secondary to the issue of student engagement and student involvement. And it often led, by the 60s to the idea, or the 70s, the idea of student choice in the content presented, okay? So we were, in the 1980s, and we are today, dogged by theorists of education who have assured us that all will be well if we are truly child-centered, okay? If we can just discern the developmental stage of the child and the interests and needs of each individual child and tailor a program to that set of needs and recognize the superiority of student-centered learning. Develop programs, they said, that relate content to the child's prior experiences and current interests, okay? Now, this was then, and it is now, a problematic premise for education, even if it is based on a true insight, okay, which is that children need to be engaged in their education. That's a perfectly legitimate insight. But this represents a romantic view of human nature and learning that is borne out by no empirical evidence, okay? And it keeps reasserting itself over and over again in American schools, and it results in the dilution of our elementary school curricula, keeping us mired in educational mediocrity, particularly at the elementary school level, when kids are capable of so much, okay? In 1987, Hirsch agreed that learning skills and critical thinking skills are very important, and there's a lot to be said for heartily engaging students in the acquisition of knowledge, engage them in ways that motivate them and relate to their interests, but he simultaneously used numerous studies on reading and the psychology of learning to point out that reading and comprehension of virtually anything that moves beyond a basal reader is highly dependent on knowledge of specific information and important facts, and that the anti-knowledge bias in American education was crippling its students. He asked, for example, how does the student understand the phrase, his ego was his Achilles heel, if he doesn't know who Achilles was or what happened to his heel? How does a reader make sense if she has the patience of Job if she doesn't know who Job was or what he endured? Or that was a Pandora's box if she doesn't know about the adventures of Pandora? Or to bring the debate into the modern era, how does the reader understand the emphatic statement, we cannot allow another Vietnam or another Iraq or another September 11th without understanding the factual knowledge base of those illusions? So Hirsch argued that at that time, the good writers build their arguments through analogy. They assume familiarity with a broad base of knowledge, and by assuming it, they are able to build and advance ideas further than they would go under other circumstances. And we see this today in everyday life. You know, headlines like when Jon Stewart retired last year, Jon Stewart joins the Mount Rushmore of comedy, right? Or in August of 2016, political headline, Iran deal is another Munich agreement, question mark. Or this premature prediction after the Access Hollywood tapes came out. So now Donald Trump meets his Waterloo? Question mark. Okay. A while ago, I read a commentary on the state of letters in America, and it was a transcript of a conversation among a group of distinguished novelists and poets talking about how they write and who they write for, and the future of literature in the United States. And it was not an optimistic commentary. The poet Derek Walcott, a 1992 Nobel laureate, noted that, like Auden, he wrote to an imaginary friend, someone with another ear. And Saul Bellow was in on this conversation, and he said, it was increasingly difficult to know who that someone is anymore. When I was young, I belonged to a very passionate population of readers. You knew there were people you could count on to understand certain things you said. For instance, references to the Bible or Shakespeare or historical events. You could mention, the Lord is my shepherd, and lots of people would know what you meant. Now you really can't be sure of it. Of course you say, the hell with them, I'm going to write this book anyhow, and they'll catch up as best they can. And the novelist Christopher Ricks, who I don't believe knew anything about a core knowledge curriculum when he said this, noted that much of the problem is in the grade schools where, quote, people are pandering to an illusion of feeling and saying, imagination is more important than knowledge. Einstein, that is a quote from Einstein, imagination is more important than knowledge. Ricks, a novelist, mind you, notes, now I don't think people need to be told that imagination is more important than knowledge. Too many people are dead ignorant. Einstein earned the right to say that because he spent a lot of time acquiring knowledge. I was struck by the fact that this discussion was taking place among novelists and poets, men and women who spend their professional lives in the realm of fantasy, right? And they, these standards bearers for fantasy, were lamenting the loss of the factual, the loss of common knowledge. The common knowledge acts as a common mooring for all of us, okay? It allows us to communicate, it allows us to bargain, to compromise, and understand each other. Can our students get by, as we are told by some educators, with just context clues? I'm reminded of a kindergartner in one of my first classes at Crossroads, and I was reading Ruth Lindbergh's poetic version of Johnny Appleseed, which contains the line, he was traveling across this land with a Bible in his hand, and one of the kindergartners said, what's a Bible? And another answered, I think it's a kind of a shovel. See, context clues don't always work, you know? So, I can still see that. What was alarming in 1987 and today, if you're not fortunate enough to have your child in a school that has thought seriously about this issue, was the degree to which schools across the country, public and private schools, had adopted a militant skills, not content mentality, as if you could have one without the other. And the degree to which schools, public and private, had accepted an empirically unjustified notion of education that learning should spring from the child, and that child-centered learning and peer education were to be favored over specified curriculum and direct instruction. Now, Hirsch argued that a good educational system and a fair educational system recognizes that there are certain facts and a certain knowledge base that all educated people must share in order to communicate with each other and be on the same page. And that's an important point. We're not just talking about enhancing our children's ability to understand literary illusions, okay? The emphasis of Don Hirsch's work and the work of the Core Knowledge Foundation has been on ensuring a strong shared knowledge base for a vibrant and functioning democracy. Excuse me. We are a republic. A broad base of communal knowledge is what unites us as a public, okay? It is the common coin of the realm. It is what makes us more than our little social media bubbles, about which President Obama himself cautioned us in his farewell address recently. Now, to not know that language is to remain forever marginalized from full participation in public life. And Hirsch argued that with our, excuse me, dry air. Hirsch argued that with our then current curricular system, we could not be sure that our students were being exposed to those facts. And indeed, there was abundant evidence to suggest that they were not. Which brings me to the second major book that came out in 1987, What Do Our 17-Year-Olds Know? Diane Ravitch and Chester Finn published this book. It was the first national assessment of high school knowledge, I'm sorry if I keep walking through that, of history and literature, okay? And Ravitch and Finn uncovered the following after a rather exhaustive and complete survey. 40% of American students, these are 17-year-olds, did not know that World War II occurred between 1900 and 1950. 32% did not know that Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, and 8% guessed that he wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. 30% did not know that Columbus landed in America before 1750. Did I get what I wanted to? Just look at the margin for error in that question. Did not know that he landed before 1750. 66% could not identify Job as known for his patience under suffering. 35% could not find France on a blank map. 30% had no idea where England was. 52% could not identify Don Quixote as the Spanish knight who tilted at windmills. 74% could not identify Sodom and Gomorrah as the cities destroyed in the Bible because of the wickedness of their inhabitants. And to me, this explained what we were seeing in our college classrooms. Bright students from good schools, but woefully ignorant. And increasingly, I was less swayed by the argument that you could tell a good school system by finding out what percentage of its students went on to college, or how many of its kids got into the Ivies. The question in my mind in the early 90s was not what's wrong with education in public schools in urban America. It was what's wrong with education, public and private, in cities and in the suburbs. And part of the answer emerging from the education reform debate had to do with knowledge. So that's the end of the theoretical. Now, back to Crossroads history. I shelved those thoughts for a few years. We had had a baby. I wrote some more and taught some more on the college level, and then it came time for kindergarten in Hanover. And a look at the curricula of area schools and a few conversations with administrators, and it became painfully apparent that the skills, not content mentality prevailed in local schools as well. And moreover, these schools were often opposed, quite viscerally opposed, to what they referred to as dictatorship of the program to the teachers. You could not dictate program to teachers. This was the thinking. And so